The courtroom smelled like old paper and floor wax, the kind of scent that clings to places where time moves slowly and decisions carry weight. Sunlight slanted through high windows, catching dust motes that floated like tiny, restless spirits above the rows of hard wooden benches. People sat quietly, some fidgeting, others staring straight ahead, all holding their breath in that peculiar hush that only courtrooms seem to demand. At the front, near the railing that separated the public from the legal players, a teenage girl sat beside her foster mother. She was 16 but looked younger, small for her age, with eyes that had learned to watch more than speak. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers laced tight, knuckles pale. She wore a clean but slightly wrinkled blouse, the kind someone had ironed in a hurry that morning. Her foster mother, a woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, kept one arm loosely around her shoulders, not squeezing, just there, steady, like an anchor. Across the aisle, a man in a second-hand suit shifted in his seat. He'd shaved that morning, combed his hair back, tried to look like someone worthy of a second chance. He was the girl's father. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since Child Protective Services removed her from his home after a call from a neighbor who'd heard screaming late one night. Now freshly out of prison and claiming sobriety, he was asking the court for visitation rights, maybe more if things went well. The judge sat high above them all, perched behind a wide wooden bench that seemed carved from the same stern wood as the room itself. He was in his late 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of long days and heavier nights. He'd been on the bench for over 2 decades. He knew how these cases usually went. Broken families, good intentions tangled with bad history, and children caught in the middle like leaves in a storm. He listened carefully as the father's lawyer spoke, painting a picture of redemption. Job secured, counseling completed, a clean apartment waiting. The girl didn't look at her father. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, on the scuff marks near the base of the witness stand, on the hem of her foster mother's sweater. But she heard every word. She remembered the nights when the shouting wasn't just loud. It was sharp, like glass breaking inside your chest. She remembered hiding under her bed, clutching her older sister's hand, both of them trembling. She remembered the day her sister never woke up. Social workers had explained it to her later in soft voices. It was an accident, they'd said. Your dad was overwhelmed, but she'd seen what happened. She was only 11 then, but some things don't blur with time. They sharpen. Now the judge leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. Based on the documentation provided and the testimony today, he began, glancing at his notes, the court is inclined to grant supervised visitation, starting once a week, pending approval from he didn't finish. Because in that moment the girl stood up. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't slam her hands on the railing or shout. She just rose slowly, as if pulled by something deeper than fear. The room, already quiet, went utterly still. Even the air seemed to pause. Her foster mother looked up at her, eyes wide with surprise but not alarm. She knew this girl, knew how long she'd held things inside. The judge stopped mid-sentence. His pen hovered over his legal pad. All eyes turned to the slight figure in the plain blouse. She didn't look at her father. She looked straight at the judge. Her voice was quiet but clear, like a single note struck on a piano in an empty room. He hurt my sister. 4 words. That was all. But in that courtroom, those 4 words landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading fast, deep, unstoppable. The judge went pale. Not just a little flushed or startled, truly pale, as if someone had turned off a light behind his eyes. His hand, still holding the pen, trembled slightly. He blinked once, then again, as if trying to clear a memory that had just surged to the surface. His mouth opened, then closed. He didn't ask her to repeat it. He didn't say, "You'll have your turn to speak." He just stared at her, his expression shifting from authority to something raw, something like recognition or regret. A beat passed. Then another. Then he cleared his throat, his voice unsteady for the first time all morning. "Court is adjourned," he said abruptly. "We'll reconvene at a later date." He didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the father, who now sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. The judge stood quickly, almost too quickly, and disappeared through the side door behind the bench before anyone could object. The room erupted into low murmurs. The father's lawyer started gathering papers with sharp, angry movements. The social worker exchanged a long look with the foster mother. But the girl? She just sat back down, her hands returning to her lap, her breathing slow and even as if she'd been carrying that sentence for years and was finally glad to set it down. Outside, the world kept turning. Cars passed on the street. A delivery truck beeped as it backed up. But inside that courtroom, something had shifted. A truth had been spoken, not in a dramatic confession, not with tears or accusations. Just 4 plain words offered like a key to a door everyone had pretended was locked. Later, as they walked out into the late afternoon sun, the foster mother squeezed the girl's shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. The girl nodded. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She'd said the only thing that mattered. Back in his chambers, the judge sat alone, staring at a framed photo on his desk, his daughter, smiling at her college graduation. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out an old case file labeled with a date from nearly 2 decades ago, and began to read. His hands weren't steady anymore, and for the first time in years he wondered if justice had ever really been served in that other case, the one with the baby girl who didn't make it, the one whose father walked free because no one could prove what everyone suspected. He hadn't connected the names at first. The surnames were different. The mother had remarried before she passed away. But now, hearing those 4 words, seeing that girl's face, it all clicked into place with a quiet, terrible certainty. The system had failed once, and today it almost failed again. But this time, someone spoke up. Just 4 words. The judge didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, a single lamp casting a yellow pool of light over stacks of old case files. The house was quiet, too quiet. His wife had gone to bed hours ago, and the only sound was the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of paper as he turned another page. His coffee had gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind was back in a courtroom that no longer existed, in a time when his hair was darker and his conscience lighter. 18 years ago, he'd presided over a case that still haunted him, not with nightmares but with quiet, persistent questions. A man stood accused of shaking his infant daughter, causing brain injuries that left her in a coma. The child never woke up, but the case fell apart. The mother, battered and terrified, recanted her statement just before trial. Medical records were inconclusive. Witnesses disappeared or changed their stories. In the end, the charges were dropped. The father walked free. At the time, the judge told himself he'd done his job. He followed the law. He couldn't convict on suspicion alone. But now, sitting in the dim kitchen light, he wondered if he'd hidden behind procedure to avoid the harder truth, that sometimes the system protects the wrong people, because the man in that old file, the one with the faded photo clipped to the front, was the same man who'd stood in his courtroom today. Older, yes, worn down by time and prison, but the same eyes, the same restless hands, and now his younger daughter, the one who'd spoken 4 words that turned his world upside down, was the sister of that lost little girl. He rubbed his temples. It wasn't just guilt, it was responsibility. He'd been the gatekeeper then, and today he'd been about to open the gate again. Meanwhile, across town, the girl sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window at the streetlight flickering on the wet pavement. Rain had started falling an hour ago, soft and steady. Her foster mother had made her tea and left it on the nightstand along with a note that just said, "You're safe." She hadn't touched the tea. She wasn't scared. Not exactly. But she felt exposed, like she'd peeled back a layer of skin in front of strangers. For years she'd stayed quiet because no one asked, or because when they did she didn't have the words. Now she'd spoken and the world hadn't ended, but it hadn't fixed itself either. The next morning, a woman from the county's Child Advocacy Center came to visit. She wasn't a lawyer or a social worker in the usual sense, more like a listener with training. She sat on the couch, not too close, not too far, and spoke in a calm voice that didn't push. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready for," she said. "But if you want to talk about what happened, I'm here." At first, the girl just shook her head, but then slowly the words came. Not in a rush, but like water finding its way through cracks. She talked about the night her sister stopped breathing, the way her father had been yelling, the way her sister had cried until she was hoarse, the thud she heard from the other room. She was only 11, hiding in the closet with her knees pulled to her chest, listening to silence fall after the noise, then footsteps, Then the phone call to 911. I knew it wasn't an accident, she said quietly, but I was too little to say it. And by the time I got older, everyone acted like it never happened. The advocate didn't interrupt, didn't write furiously in a notebook. She just nodded, her eyes kind but not pitying. Thank you for telling me, she said. That took courage. Later, the advocate filed a confidential report, not to reopen a criminal case, too much time had passed for that, but to flag serious safety concerns in the current custody hearing. She also recommended trauma-informed testimony if the girl ever had to speak in court again. Back at the courthouse, the judge requested the archived file from the old case. It took 2 days to retrieve it from storage. When it arrived, wrapped in brittle rubber bands and smelling of mildew, he read it cover to cover in his office during lunch. Notes from detectives, ER records, a photo of the baby's bruised arm, dismissed at the time as possible accidental bump. He remembered now. He'd questioned the doctor's certainty, but without stronger evidence, he'd let it go. He called a retired detective who'd worked the case. The man answered on the third ring, voice gravelly with age. You remember the Johnson case? The judge asked, using the father's last name from back then. A long pause. How could I forget? We knew he did it. But the mom wouldn't testify. Said she misremembered. We suspected he threatened her. By the time we got a warrant for his phone, he'd wiped it clean. Was there ever another child? The judge asked. Yeah, a younger girl, placed in foster care after the baby died. Mom passed a few years later, overdose, they said. The girl. I don't know what happened to her. The judge thanked him and hung up. He sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The pieces were fitting together, not with a bang, but with a slow, sickening click. He couldn't undo the past. But he could protect the present. That afternoon, he called a private meeting with the county's lead child welfare attorney and the guardian ad litem assigned to the girl's case. No formal record. Just 3 people in a quiet room speaking plainly. I believe this child is at serious risk, he said. Not just emotionally, physically. I'm ordering a full forensic social evaluation, including a review of all prior reports involving this man, and I want trauma-informed protocols applied if she testifies. The attorney hesitated. Judge, without new criminal evidence, this isn't about criminal charges, he interrupted gently. It's about whether this man should be allowed anywhere near a child who witnessed what she did. The law gives us tools to act on credible safety concerns. I intend to use them. There was silence. Then a nod. They understood. At home that evening, the girl helped her foster mother make dinner, chopping vegetables, stirring soup. It was a normal thing, a small rhythm of ordinary life. But for the first time in years, she felt like she belonged in it. Not as a guest, not as a case file, but as someone who mattered. Later, she opened a notebook she hadn't touched in months. On a blank page, she wrote, My sister's name was Lily. She didn't write more, but she didn't close the book either. Across town, the judge stood on his porch watching the rain ease into mist. He thought about the weight of a gavel, the power of a robe, the illusion of neutrality. Justice wasn't just about rules. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, and having the courage to act when silence becomes complicity. He went back inside and drafted a memo to the State Judicial Training Board. Subject: Recognizing coercive control and historical trauma in family court. He didn't know if anyone would read it, but he had to try, because this time someone had spoken and this time he was going to listen. The system moved slowly like a train that had been parked for years and now groaned as it tried to get moving again. After the girl's 4 words, everyone agreed something needed to be done, but no one seemed sure exactly what. Her statement hadn't been made under oath. It wasn't part of the official record, and in the world of courts and custody, that meant it carried less weight than people might expect. The father's lawyer was quick to dismiss it. Emotional outburst, he called it during a pre-hearing meeting. She's been coached. She's scared of change. That's understandable, but it's not evidence. He pushed hard for the original plan, supervised visits starting next week. He even brought a letter from a counselor who'd met the man twice and declared him low risk. Child Protective Services didn't say no, but they didn't say yes either. We're reviewing, they kept repeating. Pending further assessment. The girl's foster mother heard those words and felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She'd worked in schools for 30 years. She knew how pending could stretch into months. How reviewing could mean nothing changed at all. But she wasn't the kind of person who waited for permission to act. She started quietly, the way people do when they know the system won't move unless someone pushes it. She called the old neighborhood where the girl had lived as a child. Found a retired neighbor who still remembered the late-night shouting, the ambulance that came too often. That neighbor gave her the name of another, a woman who used to work at the clinic down the street. That woman recalled treating the older sister for bruises more than once, always with the same story. She fell off the bed. She dug through boxes in the attic of the girl's former school and found an old incident report. A teacher had once sent the older sister to the nurse after noticing she flinched every time a door slammed. The report had been filed, then forgotten. No follow-up, no call to authorities, just a piece of paper tucked away, yellowing with time. Meanwhile, the girl stayed quiet at school. She didn't tell her friends what was happening. She didn't want pity or attention. But she did start writing again in that same notebook, now filled with short entries. Not just about her sister, but about things she liked. The way sunlight hit the library window in the afternoon, the sound of rain on the roof, the smell of bread baking at the corner store. It was her way of saying, I'm still here. I'm more than what happened to me. One afternoon, the foster mother sat with the child advocate and laid out everything she'd gathered. The neighbor's statement, the nurse's recollection, the school report, even a faded photo from a community event where the older sister stood with a black eye, smiling like she'd been told to. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a pattern, and patterns matter, especially when they repeat across years. The advocate took it all. This helps, she said. Not for criminal court, but for family court. It shows a history of harm that was never properly addressed. At the same time, the judge was working behind the scenes. He couldn't force an investigation, that wasn't his role, but he could shape how the hearing unfolded. He issued a formal order. Before any decision on visitation, a forensic social worker would conduct a full safety assessment, including interviews with past caregivers, medical providers, and anyone with relevant knowledge. He also ruled that if the girl testified, it would be via closed-circuit video from a quiet room down the hall, with a support dog present and breaks allowed whenever she needed them. The father didn't like that. He showed up at the next procedural hearing angry, demanding to face his accuser. His voice rose as he spoke, his hands gesturing sharply. She's just a kid. She doesn't even remember right. I loved my daughter, both of them. But the judge held firm. This isn't about punishment, he said evenly. It's about whether contact is safe for the child currently in state care. That's the only question before this court. Still, the man's presence loomed. He began showing up outside the foster home, not close enough to break any laws, but near enough to be seen, standing by the bus stop, walking past the mailbox. The foster mother reported it. Police took a note but said there was nothing illegal about someone taking a walk. She started locking the doors earlier. She walked the girl to the bus stop herself. The girl noticed. She didn't say anything, but one morning she handed her foster mother a small slip of paper. On it she'd written, I'm not scared, but thank you for being. That note stayed on the kitchen counter for weeks. Behind closed doors, the forensic social worker began her review. She tracked down the ER nurse who'd been on duty the night the older sister was brought in. The nurse, now retired and living in another state, remembered clearly. The father was pacing, sweating, kept saying she just stopped breathing. But the baby's injuries, they didn't match choking. There was retinal bleeding, classic signs. She'd reported her concerns, but with no family cooperation, nothing came of it. Another piece clicked into place. The judge read the preliminary findings late one evening. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt heavy. This wasn't justice delayed. It was justice denied over and over because no one had listened to the quiet ones. He called the guardian ad litem. We need to prepare her to testify, he said. Not to prove a crime from 18 years ago, but to protect her now. Her voice matters. The advocate met with the girl again. This time she explained what testifying would look like. No big courtroom, no staring crowd, just a camera and a kind person asking gentle questions. You don't have to say everything, she said. Just what you're ready to share. The girl thought about it for a long time. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Not because she wanted revenge, not because she hated her father, but because she finally believed someone might actually listen. And this time, she wouldn't whisper. She would speak so clearly no one could pretend not to hear. The day of the testimony arrived not with fanfare, but with quiet preparation. The courthouse was quieter than usual. No reporters, no crowd. The judge had sealed the hearing, citing the minor's safety and emotional well-being. Only essential. Personnel were allowed inside. The lawyers, the social worker, the guardian ad litem, and the foster mother, who sat in the back with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Down the hall, in a small, softly lit room that felt more like a counseling office than a legal space, the girl waited. A golden retriever lay at her feet, trained to sense rising anxiety. The advocate sat beside her, not too close, just near enough to offer silent support. On the table in front of them was a glass of water and a box of tissues, though no one expected tears. This wasn't about breaking down, it was about standing up. A technician checked the camera one last time. "When you're ready," he said. "Gently. Just speak to the screen like you're talking to a friend. They'll hear you clearly in the courtroom." She took a breath. Nodded. In the courtroom, the judge adjusted his glasses. The father sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the blank monitor in front of him. His lawyer had tried to object to this setup, called it unfair, one-sided, but the judge overruled him. "This is standard procedure in trauma-informed juvenile cases," he'd said. "We proceed." Then the screen flickered to life. Her face appeared. Not large, not dramatic, just there. Pale, calm, eyes steady. She wore the same simple blouse from the first hearing, but her posture was different now. Less folded in on herself, more present. "Do you understand you're under oath?" the guardian ad litem asked gently. "Yes," she said. Her voice was soft but clear, like wind through dry leaves. "What is your relationship to the person seeking visitation?" "He's my father," she said. Then after a pause, "Biologically." The room stayed still. Even the father didn't move. "Can you tell the court what you remember about your older sister?" She looked down for a moment, then back at the camera. "She was 4 years older than me. She used to braid my hair before school. She liked drawing flowers. She was really kind." A beat passed. Then she continued. "She got hurt a lot. Bruises on her arms, sometimes her face. She'd say she fell. But I saw what happened. She didn't raise her voice, didn't point or accuse, she just told it like it was, like someone describing the weather. The night she stopped breathing, he was yelling because she spilled milk. She was crying, trying to clean it up. Then he grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Hard, she went limp. He dropped her. Then he called 911 and started saying she just collapsed. She paused, swallowed. "I was hiding in the closet. I saw everything." The father shifted in his seat. His knuckles whitened where he gripped his own arms. He didn't look at the screen. The advocate asked a few more questions. Dates, rooms, what the house looked like. The girl answered each one plainly, without hesitation. She remembered the color of the kitchen walls, the sound of the neighbor's dog barking that night, the way her sister's favorite stuffed rabbit was left on the floor, forgotten. It wasn't a performance. It was memory, raw and precise. When it was the father's lawyer's turn to question her, he stood slowly. "You were 11 years old at the time," he began. "Isn't it possible your memory is confused, that you misunderstood what you saw?" "I was hiding under the bed before that," she said. "I watched him hurt her other times, too. I learned to stay quiet." "But you never told anyone," he pressed. "I was scared," she said simply. "And no one asked." That last sentence hung in the air like smoke. The lawyer sat down. He didn't ask anything else. Then the judge spoke, not to the screen but into the microphone, his voice quieter than usual. "Thank you for your testimony," he said. "You've been very brave." She gave a small nod. The screen went dark. Back in the quiet room, the dog rested its head on her knee. She exhaled, long and slow, like she'd been holding her breath for years. The advocate handed her a tissue. Not because she was crying, but because her hands were trembling slightly. "It's over," the advocate said. "No," the girl said softly. "It's just starting." In the courtroom, the judge didn't rush. He let the silence settle. Then he turned to the court reporter. "Please pull up the archived file from 2007, case number 48219. I'd like to enter certain pages into the current record." He read aloud from his own notes, written in his own hand nearly 2 decades ago. Mother appears fearful during testimony. Recants prior statement without explanation. Medical findings concerning but not conclusive. Insufficient evidence to proceed. He looked up. "At the time, I believed I was following the law. But I failed to consider the pattern. I failed to protect a child who couldn't protect herself." He turned to the father. "You stood in this same courthouse years ago and walked away free. Today, you stand here again, asking for access to another child who has already witnessed your violence. The court cannot, will not, repeat that mistake." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The petition for visitation is denied. Furthermore, based on credible evidence of past harm and ongoing risk, the court orders the permanent termination of all parental rights." The father stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "You can't do that. I've changed. Bailiff," the judge said calmly. 2 officers stepped forward, not roughly, but firmly. The man was escorted out, still protesting, but his words faded down the hall like echoes with no one left to hear them. The judge then turned to the guardian ad litem. "Please ensure the child receives ongoing therapeutic support and file a recommendation for long-term placement stability." He meant, she won't be moved again. She'll have a home. As the room emptied, the judge stayed seated for a long moment. He thought of the baby girl who never got a chance to speak, and the teenager who finally did. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just 4 words, spoken clearly, heard fully, and honored completely. Life didn't change overnight. There was no parade, no grand celebration, no sudden fix for everything that had been broken. But something quiet and steady began to grow in the spaces left behind by fear and silence. A few weeks after the hearing, the girl stood at the edge of a small cemetery on the outskirts of town. The grass was trimmed, the air crisp with early autumn. In her hand she held a drawing, not fancy, just pencil on notebook paper. It showed 2 girls under a tree holding hands with flowers blooming all around them. She knelt and tucked it into the metal holder on a simple headstone. No dates, just a name, Lily. She didn't cry. She just stayed there for a while, watching the leaves drift down around her. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was visiting a ghost. She felt like she was remembering a sister. Back home, things settled into a new kind of normal. The foster mother stopped locking the doors during the day. The girl started walking to the bus stop alone again, but now it wasn't because she had to. It was because she wanted to. She'd wave to neighbors, nod at the mail carrier, sometimes stop to pet the old tabby cat that sunned itself on the porch next door. Small things, but they mattered. They were hers. She kept going to therapy, not because she was broken, but because it helped her untangle the knots inside. Her therapist never pushed. She just listened, asked gentle questions, and sometimes sat in silence when words weren't enough. Slowly, the girl began to trust that speaking wouldn't bring punishment, that truth could be a bridge, not a weapon. At school, she joined the art club. She didn't talk much, but she drew constantly. Trees, birds, faces full of quiet strength. One of her pieces was chosen for the spring exhibit in the library. It showed a courtroom, but not the way anyone expected. No gavel, no stern judge. Just a window with sunlight pouring through and a single hand reaching out from the shadows. Underneath, in small letters, she'd written, "I was heard." The judge didn't return to business as usual. He started attending training sessions on childhood trauma, not as a speaker, but as a student. He asked questions, took notes, listened to social workers and therapists describe how fear rewires a child's brain, how silence isn't consent, how recanting often means terrified. He realized how much he hadn't known, and how much harm that ignorance had caused. One afternoon, he sat down and wrote a letter to the State Judicial Council. Not a complaint, not a rant, but a proposal. He suggested mandatory trauma-informed training for all family court judges. better coordination between child welfare and the courts, and clearer protocols for handling disclosures from minors, even if they happen outside formal testimony. He didn't expect it to change the world, but a month later he got a call from the Chief Justice. "We're forming a task force," the voice on the other end said. "We'd like you to lead it," he agreed. Not for recognition, but because he finally understood. Being fair wasn't enough. You had to be awake. He also began mentoring new judges, especially those assigned to family court. Over coffee in his chambers, he'd tell them, "The quietest voice in the room might be the one telling the truth. Don't mistake silence for safety." Months passed. Winter came and went. The girl turned 17. Her foster mother threw a small birthday dinner, homemade lasagna, candles on a store-bought cake, a playlist of songs the girl liked. No big party, just warmth, just belonging. One Saturday morning, the girl rode the bus across town to a community center that offered support for young people in foster care. She wasn't there for help this time. She was there to volunteer. She helped set up chairs for a workshop on self-advocacy. Later, she sat with a younger boy who barely spoke, showing him how to sketch a dragon in the margins of his notebook. He smiled just a little, but it was enough. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just someone who'd finally found her voice and now wanted to make sure others knew theirs mattered too. One evening, the judge received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a drawing of a courtroom window. Sunlight streaming through, dust motes floating, just like the one in the library exhibit. On the back, in careful handwriting, it said, "Thank you for listening." He didn't know who sent it, but he knew. He tacked it to the bulletin board in his office, right next to his judicial oath. Time kept moving. The father didn't appeal the ruling. Maybe he knew it was pointless. Maybe part of him finally understood. He disappeared from the news, from the neighborhood, from the girl's life for good. And that absence wasn't a wound anymore. It was peace. The girl graduated high school that spring. She wore a simple dress, walked across the stage without shaking, and hugged her foster mother so tightly afterward that they both laughed through tears. She'd been accepted to a local college, planning to study psychology. Not to fix people, she said, but to understand them. On the last day of summer before classes started, she went back to the cemetery. This time, she brought real flowers, daisies, her sister's favorite. She sat on the grass and talked for a while, not in whispers, but in a normal voice, like she was catching up with an old friend. "I'm okay," she said. "I'm really okay." And for the first time, she believed it. The story didn't end with a perfect life. There were still hard days, nights when old memories surfaced, moments of doubt, times when the world felt heavy. But now she had tools. She had people. She had a future she was building, not just surviving. And the judge? He still presided over tough cases, still wore the robe, still carried the weight of his decisions. But he carried it differently now, with more humility, more care, more willingness to look beyond the paperwork and see the human being standing before him. Because sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes, it's about making space for healing. Sometimes, it starts with 4 words, spoken by someone the world had taught to stay quiet. And sometimes, those 4 words are enough to change everything, not just for one girl, but for all the others who come after her, hoping someone will finally listen.